start. And got that up. This up over here. Copy link. All right, I think we are up and rolling. Good afternoon. Get some inking done, I think. Let me bring my scrap sheet in a little closer. Oh, where are you going? Get this over here. So a little easier access to my tools, right? A little warmed up. Okay. Mix it up a little bit. Hello, hello. We'll be on for the next couple hours at least, I think. So have a seat. Let's focus on this just to make it ink a little deeper. Let's see, got this one over here. Put you there. Maybe else wandering around that I can shove over there. Alright, this is everybody. Just double checking. I'll put some fresh ink in here anyway. Before I get started, my little jar. All right. I'll have to think about it. Now, where to start? I think down at the bottom, maybe. Something kind of specific, always helpful for me. It's not too challenging, like this over here. It's pretty wet ink. It's pretty good. There we go. Lavadiena. Good afternoon. I'll take this around a bit. So easier. Get it if it's up here, right? Just got it primed up. Almost there. There we go. All cleaned up. Good afternoon. There it is. Kind of wish I had multiples of that um, that wooden pen. So I like how it feels. But I know, I just have to know. So that's the one that I get to work with, I guess. How do I decide what to ink first is the question. I like to pick something that I feel 100% about, and that kind of lets me calibrate. So, like, I know exactly what I'm going to do with it, and that's how I decide. Um, I did this pencil drawing over the last yesterday and this morning, and so I blew it up, scanned it in, blew it up, and thought I would ink it away. Kind of getting into my little project here. So, I thought we would. Of course, these are some foreground elements that are going to be a little heavier, so I'm not worried about having to fill things in as much. Um, Probably just makes it easier, less stressful on me if I mess something up. Actually, I haven't used this nib in a while too, so I was a little worried about it. Not too much, but a little bit. How do you decide what to ink first? Um, it's a bigger picture, and I thought it would be fun to do. And I realized I didn't have to take it anywhere to scan it because I'd drawn it just small enough it would fit on my scanner. So I dropped it into my little comic file here, and Hmm. I'm curious to see how quick this goes, because I kind of have this weird tendency to think, well, if I spend a lot of time on it, it'd be better. But a lot of times I like thinking, there's a certain brevity, I think, that's helpful. Especially since I've got the drawing resolved, and it's fairly abstract, I think, for the most part, in terms of the landscape here. Yeah, the most important challenging, huh? That seems scary. Um, I guess if you mess that up, then you already know you got to start over, right? Um, so you don't waste a lot of time. Get a little loud in here. That's better. Yeah, just trying to get back into the groove of things. So it's a little comic project that I want to do. Um, I had family uh, difficulties over the winter break, um, and then I had to get ready for school, and I had a bunch of tenure track paperwork I had to deal with um, for myself. I had to write up an academic CV, which uh, wasn't my favorite thing to do. And so yesterday I was like, well, let's see if we can get back. Because I was looking at my story stuff, and I'm mostly happy with kind of the layout of the story. I need to start selecting a few kind of sample pages, a few more to do for different parts of the story for the pitch that I think would be helpful. I kind of know, the ones that I want to do for the most part, and knock those out pretty quick. Um, so, um, but I thought a good way to do is just kind of like, I've been doing a bunch of sketchbook stuff, during breaks. Nothing to say related to this, but just things that I'd like to doodle. And then I do a little bit of that live stream. In the process, I realized I'd changed some stuff before the break and forgotten about it. and it was causing me headaches. I didn't know why until I changed a few things, and so I had to sort out what all those things were, and mostly like the live streaming thing. And then I also had this humorous error when I picked up an airbrush recently, which I've never used. Well, I picked up like a year and a half ago, but it was just sitting in a box in this room. I opened it up for I went home. Um, for the funeral, and opened it up and used it for like a couple times, and then took off and didn't have hadn't looked at it. So when I came back, I was playing around with some of the knobs and dials on it, and messed one thing up and didn't realize it. So when I was using it, it was kind of awkward. And then trying to figure out what that was, I didn't realize it, but I loosened another valve, which was causing it to make even a bigger mess. I know now, but yeah. So I spent a couple hours in the afternoon the other day figuring what that was. Said I know now. It's always, I think, a little entertaining when you're tripping over rakes, that you put down. It's like the image of that kid putting a stick into the bicycle uh, wheel, and felt like that was me for a good chunk of that day. Um, but I got it all sorted out, so thankfully. It's funny. I was talking to a friend about this stuff, and he's like, "Wow, you're really like going crazy with the old school stuff." And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "You've heard of this?" Because he's a few years older than I am. I think 5 or 6 years older, maybe 8, something like that. But he heard of a waxer. I was like, "No, I didn't know what that was." And by the time I was in school, a lot of the publishing stuff had moved to the desktop, and that was, when I started was in the '90s, and then graduated in the early mid 2000s, and by then we were, '96, we were already using Photoshop and Illustrator, and later Quark Express, and then like a year later, or a couple years later, InDesign came out, and so we weren't, using a lot of these older methods. And so he was talking about a waxer where he used it to place things down, something he had to learn to use when he was in school and used professionally for a number of years. And he actually completely transitioned out of commercial illustration um, soon after that, because he was kind of watching where things were going with the computer, and he just didn't want to deal with it. As a young man, he would have been in his 20s at that point, and shifted over to doing religious painting for Catholic churches. Um, he agrees. I think his maybe the most notable thing he did recently was a piece for the papal visit to Philadelphia a number of years ago. Now he did a painting of the Holy Family for their visit as a commission. It's kind of I'm not Catholic, but I think that's still pretty distinctive as far as like a career opportunity goes. Careful. So Um, yeah, so he jumped out of that pretty quick. He was doing a lot of commercial illustration, designing for the Franklin Mint. I said he watched within a few years where a bunch of 20-year-olds came in and took up the jobs that people in their 50s and 40s have been doing for 20, 30 years, and wanted out. It's really wet. It's got too much ink on there. So, but I thought that was an interesting perspective because I remember when I was in school, as an undergrad, like I only really had one professor who really could illustrate with digital media. I mean, one of them did a little bit, like kind of his little experiments, but he never really did it that seriously. Enough to like teach a Photoshop Illustrator class, and back when you had actually take real photographs and scan them in. But when I was taking it, we had only really one professor who was like a real bona fide digital guy. And he wasn't like young or anything, relatively speaking, and he was the same age as the other professors. But he was adjunct and art director at a game company. And but anyway, I had a lot of the digital stuff I really had to learn on my own. Like I had to ask this other guy questions all the time. But I was kind of in that transition period in school where really most of your coursework was done in analog or traditional media, and then the digital stuff I was just kind of doing mostly on my own. But it's been interesting to watch the circle come around. Like a lot of the stuff I'm doing with the inking, like this isn't anything I was taught as a technical skill. Like most of my teachers were like editorial, kind of book cover, children's book illustrators. So we didn't really have like a storyboard guy or a comic book illustrator. It was all those kind of other print markets where they worked. And so, and I always drew with ink, in my sketchbook, but I've been trying to pick up some more kind of, I guess you might call it, what would be the word? More designerly approaches to it, like you would, work in a comic book or something. Where I feel like I can get a nice, consistent result and works well with my aesthetic and design sensibility. So, um, but I found like I really like how this calligraphy nib handles. It's not for doing like the tiniest details, but I like how it kind of creates a nice uh, gestural line, a calligraphic line. You can draw sideways with really sharp lines, and using the broad tip to fill in large areas, or just kind of get that sweeping effect or chunked effect. So yeah, I've got a few things I've done in my sketchbooks with this nib that I really like, and then kind of combine it with a few other things to get the effect I like. I think I've been trying to shift more and more into analog media with the way generative AI is influencing things in such a harmful, negative way. It's kind of made me like not even really want to look at my computer. Um, or the way computer prices are going up too as a result of reduced available hardware, and then the worsening of the software. It's called technical terms actually enshittification, and it's like I'd rather just use some ink and a pen. Probably color things digitally, but probably do the lettering in there too. But I'm trying to also switch off of Adobe as much as I can. I'm trying to find really good alternatives. Like I've been using the Affinity apps for the last year or so, pretty extensively for photo editing and that kind of thing, and I've been really happy with it so far. The foreground's okay, I think. So about the G nib. While the dog sleeps on the floor. Yeah, I think this Kohinoor stuff, I might need to leave it open a little bit. This feels like it's just like a little too wet. Like this ink I've been doing with that other nib has just been like a little too drippy. Not bad, just a little too much. I think it's the ink. Well, yeah, I've definitely used. I've got an iPad. I've got Procreate. I've got Art Studio Pro. My favorite is Infinite Painter. Um, yeah, I've definitely tried a ton of stuff. Those are the three main ones I've used. I used to use Art Studio Pro a lot when I first started. Um, Using the iPad back in like 2010 10 or 12. I've even got my OG stylus. I actually have it out over here. I was looking at it the other day. I was like, hey, look at that. I still have it. Actually works on my phone still, too. For some apps that have the software integrated. But this is the first non-disc stylus for iPad. And so it's a Bluetooth, and then this is the charger. It's like has a little magnet. I have two because I lost one of the chargers, but charge it like that, and then it pairs with individual apps if they have the software development kit in it. But I use I use the Apple Pencil now. But yeah, definitely know all about the iPad. I used to teach classes for it in when I lived in Hong Kong. I had a digital drawing class, and most students would bring their laptops because not iPads were still new then. It had been out for I think a couple of years at that point, but so they bring their laptops. We go landscape painting and things like that. When I lived in Hong Kong, but again, I just um, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately because I'm a teacher, so I think about my students all the time, or more than I should in terms of like what we're doing as teachers. And one of the things I've been thinking about is maybe emphasizing digital in school the way we have. Not that it doesn't have a place, or especially in certain areas, but maybe overemphasizing it or emphasizing the way that's been done has been a mistake. And I've been teaching, digital art as a class since I guess maybe 2010 or 11. Um, I taught it at a school in Utah, digital illustration class up there. I was using Corel Painter mostly back then. It and Photoshop were still kind of neck and neck at that point. Um, but yeah, but I definitely see the attraction for Procreate. I think it's actually, I mean, it's really good for certain things. I like Infinite Painter better just because it has certain tools in it and ways of working, and you can customize the interface in ways that you can't in Procreate. Or couldn't. I haven't did Procreate in a while, but at least they weren't available. So I've mostly been using Infinite Painter if I'm using my iPad. But again, that emphasis on the digital. So one of the things that I think that there's a study, and I wish I could find it because I sent it to some people. I know I did. Like someone was asking me about it. I'm like, I have no idea where it is. Basically, it was a study that was dealing with haptic experience and how that influences our intellectual growth. So, haptic is like, when your phone buzzes in your hand when you're moving something around, right? So it kind of feels like you're really touching something. You get it in your game controllers and other places, but haptic. Um, and anyway, it affects how you think about things, and it affects your growth as an artist. And one of the things I've been talking about even before I saw this was I was thinking, you know, for the most part, like we seem to be recycling a lot of designs going back, 30, 40, 50 years into new projects. We're looking back on a very, very small number of visual development artists for the most part for a lot of what we do. The aesthetics, the atmosphere, the designs. Uh, all that, like we look at a very small handful of properties that were developed by a very small number of people. And I'm like, well, why was that? And I've been wondering if part of that is there's a couple of things. One of them is by using uh, analog media. Let's check that. All right, but by using analog media, so pens and brushes and different kinds of paint or markers or whatever, um, that it affects our development. And because it's harder to do, one, only people who get good at it can get into a specific market. Only people that can achieve excellence do it, and the people that do achieve that excellence, they also grow as artists and designers because they're forced to do something physically and mentally challenging, and they're kind of put in that situation where they have to fail or succeed, at a consistent basis, and as a result, they grow. And then on the inverse side of that, if they're using digital media, it's much easier, right? There's the undo button, there's layers, there's adjustment layers, there's all these different things that you can do that mediate the possibility of failure. And so it's just easier to use. So what that means is even if someone, say, could be, the next Sid Mead, could have that level of impact on concept art or illustration, that they don't become that person at that level of excellence because they never had to exercise that level of skill development. Um, and I'm not saying you can't use digital or you should never ever use it or whatever. Just saying that because it is easier, by definition, you don't grow as much because you're using it. It simulates a greater level of skill and mind than you actually have. And then on the other side of that, because it is easier, it also lets people of lesser potential ability into those markets. And because they're lesser, they have lesser minds. That not only do they not grow as much, they have a lower possibility for the amount that they can grow. And I think that's part of the reason why we see so much kind of recycling of content, the kind of the evident lack of originality and creativity, the numerous sequels, the things that kind of feel like other things being repeated over and over again. That's not to say this didn't exist before, but it seems to be happening at a very, very high rate of speed. And so you kind of get that hello over there on kick. So because it is easier, like definitionally, it's not even up for debate. That's simply easier to use digital media. Um, the only inverse of that might be the 3D stuff, but I think same thing. I think once you do have a certain degree of mastery in, say, Blender or whatever, um, the challenge kind of gets reduced very quickly. But because it does so much for you. And it's been sitting on my mind for a while. Anyway, I saw this study recently And basically, it was saying that that haptic experience does actually, affect your brain development, and is important for developing, greater connections in your mind, and being, better. And I was like, oh, I'm not crazy, but now I can't find the study. I can't remember what I did with it. There's a couple places it might be inside of or part of something else. There was a guy who put out a video that was going around from I think the YouTube channels, like Stories of Old, and he was talking about how that haptic versus kind of a superficial view of things in film. So when you look at a lot of older film, you see it, he does point out a lot of modern examples where it's done really well. But if you look at older films, a lot of times, like, everything is being carefully considered that goes into the shot. That everything's nice and clear. You can tell what's happening. There's no sense that they're making a show and saying, "Oh, we'll fix it in post." It's just they have to get it right. There's certain things they can do in editing or whatever to improve it later. But as far as that shot goes, they got to get it spot on the first time. And anyway, so you'll see kind of in those shots that everything is really laid out. It's all very competent, and then, they do it in whatever takes it requires. But a lot of times it's the kind of stuff you can really only do one time, and so it just has to be right. And whereas a lot of the modern cinema relies again a lot on these kind of after these post development and repair for the shots, and you see that too, like even with like games, right? So a lot of games, because they're released by a server, they're downloaded. They're not. You're not running off a disk that you can't ever update, like say you would with, like Super Mario Brothers or something back in the '80s, where you get a cartridge, and the entire game was on there, and there was no patch for it, right? It was just you got what you got, so it had to be perfect on launch. And there's a major event in the '80s where a game was launched imperfectly, and they dumped all the cartridges in some hole in the desert. I guess this is the story. It's the E.T. game. It was such a disaster they just had to scrap it. It was unplayable, and it just didn't work. But anyway, that haptic thing, like he was pointing out some good examples. Like you watch Jaws, you'll see them on the, or not Jaws, but what's it? The Heart of Darkness. It's Apocalypse Now. And you can see them in the desert, not desert, in the jungle. They're sweating and they're uncomfortable, and the atmosphere is affecting them. You can feel the dust and the grime. You can really tell, what it's like to be there. And then you compare that with something like Jurassic World, where they're showing up in a tropical environment, and everything feels kind of neat and clean. No one's sweating. Everyone looks comfortable. There's it's nice and bright and clear. There's no sense of that they're actually in a place that would give them discomfort, because they're not from there, right? For the most part, the actors are all from the United States, and they're not from Central South America, wherever Jurassic World movies take place. Confess, I haven't actually really watched. I think I've maybe seen one of them a long time ago. I forget which name it was called, but with that haptic experience, like it separates the viewer from what's going on in an important way. And He did use as a positive example the Avatar movie, just because the textures are so deep in it. But I don't know if that's actually a good example. I think he was kind of reaching with that one. It still feels like a cartoon world. There's a lot of really great texture and everything in those films. At least the one that I saw a long time ago. But oof. But um, but yeah, but that actual kind of tactile experience, that kind of got me thinking, about that competence, right? So you got to get it right. So if you look at the history of graphic design or illustration, like you did your illustration and then you mailed it off, and they did a photograph of it or whatever to get it onto the paper. But it's not like unless you were living where the publisher was at, like in New York. Um, if there was edits, they'd have to mail it back to you. And so you really were trying to nail it on that first try. Or, if they're doing layouts for a magazine, they got to paste down all of the information before it goes to press, and it's got to be right. And they've got to use physical materials and labels and text and all that to put it down. And again, it's got to be right. There's just no other option. Um, and it makes me kind of wonder about the digital thing too, because you can endlessly edit it. Um, you don't have to like be as confident or competent about it. You can just kind of, you know, let it go, and it's fine. And if there's a problem, you can always edit it later. It's kind of a casualness to the profession. It simply wasn't possible. It would have broken things if you treated an oil illustration or acrylic illustration that way and mailed it off, even an ink one. It had to be delivered on time and had to be perfect. And anyway, it got me thinking about the film thing. Got me thinking about the areas I've worked in and the way I'm working with students and that what if over not I think it should be part of the education absolutely, but maybe overemphasizing it too early has actually caused them more problems than it's solved. So things get a nice good look superficially, but the learning that could take place isn't happening. And so that's been kind of just one of the things that's on my mind. Um, yeah, definitely. There's scientific studies showing that variety and haptic interaction make a difference. And one of the problems you run into with digital, is when you're using your Apple Pencil or your stylus on your Cintiq or Huon or whatever, is you only have one kind of touch you're having, no matter what the materials are that you are rendering or the kind of brush you're using. So no matter how big or small your brush is, the uh, the tool itself doesn't change. Right? So if you're using a giant 200 pixel wide airbrush, it's the exact same experience as using a 1 pixel brush, haptically. and been wondering, if maybe that was a mistake, just because when you train people to do things that way, they're really only having one sensory experience. And again, it's not that digital isn't valid or useful or should be dropped. Um, and I was kind of in this intermediary period, so I got the benefit of using a lot of analog media. But my mindset had shifted very much when I was in school, and mostly using digital stuff for my school projects at a certain point, depending on the class. Um, and I don't blame the teachers or anything, or even myself. It's just what was going on at the time. But it's definitely something I'm thinking about now. That yeah, I've done a ton of digital illustration. So lately, I've been focusing online for about doing more analog or traditional media. I also prefer the term analog. Can I tell you how to live stream? That's a big question. I would probably go on YouTube to ask that question and find a video showing you how to get it all set up. I have an overhead camera. It's actually an older camera now. It's A6000 from Sony with a large lens on it. And then I have everything connected into um, OBS. And then I'm also using two computers to live stream with. One is where the camera is going directly into, and then the other is and then the other is an older computer that I'm actually streaming from. Keep this over here. Let's see. Put this over here just so it reminds me not to move this too much to the left. But yeah, and then you have a YouTube channel. There's a key, a number inside of your channel, YouTube or Kick or whatever, and you have to get that. You plug that into OBS, and we'll get you all set up. Or if you just have a phone, you can live stream directly from your phone too on a lot of the applications. So yeah, it's a big question though. Took me a while to figure it out. In fact, I still make mistakes like I was making here a couple days ago. Seems like it's all fixed up though now, I think. Would be nice if I had a more powerful. I guess I do. I just have to set it up. Computer to stream off of. But should maybe experiment. Though I think like what I've got here is pretty good in terms of quality and all that. So, but yeah. Beyond that, it's hard to say. It depends on the kind of live streaming you want to do as well. Like, you don't need a camera on top if you're gonna live stream to from your desktop or something like that. So that makes a difference too. Hello, hello, we're on Kick. It does seem like I've unbroken my system, so that's good. All right. Well, hopefully it will be, right? We're still starting out here. I'm definitely referencing an older piece I did. Oh yeah. Why aren't they watchable? Um, I'm excited. I did see Primal is starting up, I guess, on HBO tomorrow. Be on, I guess, Adult Swim tonight, and then be on the HBO streaming thing tomorrow. I'm excited about that. That's Jendi Tartakovsky's new show about a caveman and his Tyrannosaurus Rex. Or I guess it's an Allosaurus or something. Um, so yeah, that's what we got going on here today. Get going with something. My brain gets all toasty. Gets me all fired up. Always appreciate any respect I can give. That's good. Yeah, be sure and subscribe if you have not. Appreciate it. I need to plug this information into these things somehow. I think that's something I should do today or tomorrow. Put it on the list. But I'm working on a comic book, and I'm not sure how it'll get released. I was thinking of doing crowdfunder, but I think it might be good to try and get it published regularly, at least first. And so I'm working on a pitch for that, and this kind of helped me to get warmed back in and into that. So I got to, we're working on some character names and title names today, and feeling better about that. I can kind of back revise the script. I was trying to get my head back into working on this after having been away from it for so long, and so. But I thought this would be a good way. It's kind of I call it vertical slice. It's not 100% one. It probably have to be twice as long to be the kind that would be. Maybe that's something to think about actually doing is extending this so it's twice as long, twice as deep. But kind of some of the territory that the main character is going to pass through, and I should do this background area here. This is going to be pretty narrow, but so that's kind of what I'm working on here. Some nice atmospheric qualities here. Um, as he traverses the territory. But yeah, I've got like an email list for it. I think if you go to my illustration site, there's sign up or something there, or on my Instagram. But we call it the Bramble Project. I think I've got a better name for it now. I've been workshopping in my head, so we'll see how I feel about that later. But uh, but yeah, whether I do it as a crowdfunder or a published one, it'd be good to have if you're interested in it, an audience to send it to. So that's something to consider doing if you haven't checked it out. I have a background in visual development and illustration, along with painting and things like that. So I'm hoping to kind of bring all of that together in one singular large kind of project. And I've got a story written up, and it kind of originated from me uh, thinking about and redeveloping, revising some of my older thoughts, and then also making some new portfolio things and exploring some other media. And sketchbook wanderings as well. And kind of stories developed out of that. And I think it's one worth telling. So yeah, so if it interests you, let me know. And I think I need to get that information plugged into the different places so that I can hopefully get an audience going with it. So gotta go through and check all of my stuff, make sure it's all what I need it to be, so I can share it with everybody. Well, thanks for the follow there. Where was I? I think I might hit up some of these upward facing. Yeah, as usual, don't hesitate to ask if there's any questions or comments. Don't mind chit chatting. I'm never sure it's quite there, so if I've already said something, I don't want to be too repetitive. Inside out on this thing, so. Some person, different account from today. Oh, same person. I see. Carafaiho. Welcome back. Yeah, I was doing pretty good about posting and all that too before end of November rolled around, and so my account was growing. I was being active on here, and then more important things came up that I had to deal with. So hoping to be back on the regular with all this with the new year. It's always hard to tell who's in here. I never quite know. Yeah, we haven't tried out Infinite Painter. Like, it's really good. I think there's like it's kind of a freemium model, so it has like a free trial version that you can then unlock. But there's a lot of again unique things where you can kind of customize the interface and do things that you can't really do in Procreate as much. So, you know. Let's see, what was I doing? That's right, there's a guy standing there. It's interesting, when I first started using this larger paper, 11 by 17, or kind of like about A3, depending on where you're from. It felt a little daunting. It felt like much bigger than I'm used to. It's twice as big as I'm used to working most of the time when I'm, doing the paper. Not for figure drawing or things like that, but like, my sketchbooks and that where I'm really drawing. I think and it kind of felt scary a little bit the first time I was working larger. But I found over time, which I knew would happen with this too, that the longer I work with a size, kind of the more comfortable it feels. And it didn't take at all very long for 11 by 17 to feel almost like small. It's funny because there's a comic book being put out right now by a pretty well-known illustrator for comics, David Finch, called Skinbreaker, and he actually illustrated it on his paper, but twice the usual size or bigger, which is kind of insane to do it like that because that's pretty rare. To do things like that. So I'll just check out how this thing's doing here. Good. Just double checking. What was this about? Nothing there. Nothing there. So, everything checks out over there. This way. Yeah, it was interesting. Kind of as I've worked on it, the easier it's become to work at this size. And it feels perfectly kind of natural. Um, yeah, it did feel somewhat intimidating. I appreciate that. Yeah, the pencil drawings over here that I did originally. I guess I can't move it. Got something in the way. But not without securing this. But it's about half the size. It's a little bit larger than half the size of this. And this is my own custom comic paper too. Um, so I was looking up, templates and things to kind of get, a good idea. And I realized as I'm looking around, like things are either inaccurate or not very precise. And that's fine, probably most of the time. But for me, I'm like, well, why not just set it up and make my own? Unless you're buying like pre-printed or something like that. I noticed a lot of people they had templates out there, but they just weren't very good. And so it was a good opportunity to kind of get in and learn a little bit about Affinity, which is I've kind of switched to using that software over Adobe over the last year. Adobe is really just a pain to use, and it's gotten worse over time. No, I'm not a calligraphy guy, but it is a calligraphy nib, right? So it's like a flat. It's a Type C calligraphy nib. I've been digging. I was digging through my um, tin of forgotten art supplies, and I was like, oh, I wonder what it's like to use this one because it's got that flat side on it, but it's not too big. So it's nice for kind of getting in long calligraphic lines. Um, ink though does feel just like a little wet. Like it should feel. I think it feel like slightly, like a stickier. Maybe is the word. I'm not sure. But yeah, I even got some of these over here. These pens. The what do they call them? I'm just remembering what they're called. They're for writing calligraphy, but they've got like a well inside. Parallel pens. That's what they're called. Parallel pens. They are like a lot sturdier. It dries okay. It's just like the paint itself, like it feels like it leaves a little bulbies on it or something. I think what it is, I switched to using Koh-i-Noor ink. It's a low clogging ink, and it's for these technical pens I have on the side for rapidographs for these guys right here. This is for them to kind of avoid clogging problems as much as possible. And so I've been using it for like everything. So I've put it into different nibs. I think it's partially my fine art background where I want everything to be really consistent. And so like I'll see a lot of comic creators and they'll mix brush with microns and markers and all these other things, and it kind of just makes me cringe a little bit just because like markers are really not very light fast, so they'll turn purple and blue over time and lose their color. Whereas this is like real ink, and so it's just carbon and water really with a binder in it, unlike like a micron. And so I've been putting this into all of my stuff. Um, Yeah, I've got a few of mine over here. Like I bought this. It's funny. I was commenting earlier. I don't think you were in here, but basically that when I was in school, it was kind of this transitionary period where digital was starting to become a thing. And most of my professors didn't really know much about it or use it. But it was obviously kind of where the trend was. And I had like one really good adjunct professor who used digital, and so like when I was in school, a lot of those tools like Kohinoors for pitographs, they just weren't being used. And so like this set I got, I didn't get in school. I can, if they're not making a mess, my thumb dried off. But like it never was part of what I did, like ever. Um, it's like I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was telling me about how they would do paste ups because he's not that much older than me, but it's like 8 or 9 years. But it made a big difference in terms of what was being taught when he was a student. And like he would use it's called an electro stick, I guess. It's a wax heating stick, and it was used to kind of do paste downs of things, and it was used in comics and other media. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But it wasn't ever part of what I was doing in school. By the time I was in school, Quark Express had taken over publishing software, so things like that tool were no longer necessary. Which is funny. I actually looked it up on eBay, and I found a couple of them being sold in England. for like $20, $30 or something like that. If I could get free shipping, I would probably thought about ordering just because. Um, but yeah, but I picked up a set of rapidographs on eBay. It was like 40 or $50, and I know a full set like that's like 100 and something. And I think only one or two of them had ever been used, and even now, I think only like 3 or 4 of them have I've used. Just because how many sizes do you really need? And so, I think it was missing the wrench. So there's a little wrench that lets you more easily take things apart. And I got one when I got a cleaning kit because I realized I'd let the ink in there too long. I hadn't used them in a while, and so I need to get a cleaning kit. And the cleaning kit came with a wrench. Actually, a spot on there for 2 of them, so I have to keep my eye out for another one to kind of complete the set. So I really like it. I like it, because I can use real ink. I've got a little injector. I've got the little drip thing on there, and it's just nice to be able to like use like one ink for everything. It satisfies my need for consistency with my medium. Well, that's good. Well, at least they started making them again. Like I said, like that waxer thing. Like I don't, I think the company's still around. If we're trying to remember the name of it was off the top of my head. It's like a name I'm familiar with, but it's a different company. I think it was a Japanese company. But it's electro stick. I guess you would put like these little cubes of wax in it and put them on the back of the paper to affix things down. But it was, we were talking about that kind of thing earlier just because I've been, I got a thesis in my brain for a while that kind of the reliance on digital has certainly made things easier, across all professions, right? So you don't have to remember things, you don't have to figure out where things are at. It's all cataloged and organized, and so there's a certain amount of utility to that. But I think also it also engenders a kind of an attitude of casualness to things because you don't have to worry about certain things. You do not worry about them. And because of that, you can, say if you're delivering work to a client, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect, unless it has to go to like press that day or they're releasing a product or something like that very day. Whereas before, when you'd mail off a project, which I never had to deal with, thankfully, it had to be perfect when you mailed it off. Otherwise, you're just out of luck. And what are you going to do then, right? If it's not good, then they're going to be upset. You're going to have problems. Going to call you. You have to have their in-house guy or whatever fix it up for them. And so there was a certain kind of competence that you had to have in order to deliver excellence. And I've just kind of noticed a general competency crisis. Oh yeah. Okay, so I'm 47. So if you're older than that, by a bit, you'll have lived through that, right? I feel like we've talked before, but it's been a while. But it's like I'm talking to this old school concept artist. He's still active, actually. He worked a bunch on the new Metroid game. He's worked on like Terminator 2, like the movie, which he goes back into the 80s, working in film and then later in games. But he was showing a bunch of his old concept art before Photoshop. It's a little acrylic and gouache sketches and pencil and things like that. But yeah, but you think about it, like video games, they get delivered in a unfinished, broken state a lot now. Before it used to be like a major scandal. If a game launched and it needed a fix, right? Because you wouldn't be able to fix it unless you had access to the internet, and not everybody had that, or disk space, or whatever. You'd need to be able to fix it. And I think that the most famous incident where a game launched completely broken and cost people a lot of money was the ET game in the 80s, and it was so bad they buried it in the desert, right? And so things had to be perfect on launch, otherwise it was just a disaster. So, but now with digital, you can be pretty, be pretty casual with things, and I wonder if that's impacted our culture overall in a way that may have been short-sighted and harmful. So, like one of the things I like to say is I don't like to say traditional media; I like to say analog media, because in my mind, it's not just it's not good because it's old. It's good because it's ink or oil paint or gouache or whatever. And it's good because of the qualities that it has. So, but I have this kind of working thesis in my brain that maybe this was all a big mistake, and we're actually undermining. Like I teach at a university, and maybe we're undermining our student development by allowing them to use digital and focusing on it so much. Certainly, you definitely want it for publishing or whatever, but in terms of illustrating and maybe even learning concept art skills or comics or other things like that, that maybe by overemphasizing it, that we kind of got in people's ways. And I've kind of pointed out, I think it has two effects. One is it keeps the people that would be impactful and excellent from really achieving that excellence because so you don't have a flea on you, Mr. Bosch. I have to check you out. Huh? It's a constant battle around here with living downtown with the fleas. All right, Bosch. Sorry, my dog is just over there on the side. But yeah, but I wonder if we kind of got in the way of those people by letting digital be such a dominant thing in our classes, because it is easier to use, right? So it's not like it takes the same amount of effort to learn to paint on Photoshop as it does to do like a really good painting in oil or acrylic or gouache or watercolor or whatever, caustic. Even those gross water-based oil paints. But yeah, and at the same time, because it is easier, it makes it easier for people that wouldn't be very good to get in. Less talented, potentially. And I don't know quite what to do, but it's just something I've been bringing up, and we're adjusting some of our curriculum based on things that I think would be beneficial. Um, and But it's kind of been a running thesis in my head. That may be one of the reasons why we see the things we see in media or government or other places is this um, casualness to excellence. Kind of getting it good enough for release and not really thinking about, the longer tail of the ramifications that it can bring because of that. Or I could just be, making up some nonsense that doesn't really matter all that much. But it was like the other day I saw an artist he's got a huge following, like a couple 100,000 followers or something like that. Somebody I follow does a lot of teaching online, and he was telling his followers, "Oh, you don't need to learn anatomy. You just need to learn the essential shapes. Like, you don't need to learn the names of things or whatever." And I'm like, I don't think it's ever a good idea to argue in favor of not knowing things. Like in the case of anatomy, yeah, certainly the larger shapes that they make, the forms that they intersect with and develop, those are the most important things, absolutely. Um, you don't need to know all the names of all the muscles that you can't see. And I definitely do think there's like a tiered list of things that are important to start with. Like landmarks and basic muscles and bones. But, I would never say you don't need to know them, because if you can identify the name of a muscle, it makes it easier for you to spot it. Just like you know the name of a person, it makes them more recognizable to you. And I just thought that was a really terrible take on the that area. Just because like I have this thing where it's like you don't need to know you don't know what you don't know what you don't know that you need to know. That you need to know more than you need to know because you don't know what you need to know. And so it's always a good idea to be always expanding that corpus of knowledge as a way of uncovering the things that you don't know about. Because if you're unaware of something, then kind of blind to its existence. It's like when you if you're learning a foreign language, if you're English and you're learning Spanish or Russian or whatever, and you learn a new word, suddenly you'll hear that word all over the place. Whereas before you never heard it because you didn't know it existed. Or like you buy a car, it's the first time you bought that kind of car. And you suddenly realize that that car is everywhere. Or you're about to buy, you're researching it, suddenly you start seeing it all over the place because you're suddenly more aware of its existence. And so I think I would definitely disagree with them and say, hey, names are important. They make a difference. And you might, and the other thing too, if you don't know the names and you're focusing mostly or entirely on shapes, you end up having kind of a short-changed view of what's going on, where you can replicate a style or a pattern of forms, but you don't actually understand what you're looking at, and so you're just kind of being a copy of a copy of a copy, which is recursive, which can be a real big problem if you're trying to do anything well. And makes a big difference. So, let's see, mug. now I just have water. Um, but yeah, so yeah, when he put that out there, I was like, I gotta say something. It's like, I never want to argue in favor of ignorance, like ever. Um, but again, I would say there are levels. Like, someone was asking me the other day, like, if you're studying anatomy or figure drawing, what do you start with? And I think you start with, the underlying structure. You start with proportions, gesture. I think is really important too. And then once you get those, like the initial gesture and proportions down, and the underlying structure, you want to start identifying major landmarks. And some of them are easier than others. Like there's ones that are really hard or harder. Like the greater trochanter can be harder to spot. But it's important to know, or the pubic symphysis, because those two spots represent the halfway point on the figure, and from head to toe or head to heel, and they line up with each other at approximately that halfway point. And like that's a spot that people don't normally think about, just because it actually is. It's not as obvious as like the head of your humerus, your shoulder bone area, or your patella, um, or your olecranon, your elbow. Um, Sometimes I forget body parts too. Like I don't remember all the muscles in the forearm, but I do group them into their basic functional and how they're named pattern, which is your extensors and your flexors. And I should probably go back and review the muscles there just so I remember them more exactly. Well, like I always confuse which one's on top and which one's on the bottom. And that's the semimembranosus and semitendinosus, which are a couple of your adductor muscles in your leg and your thigh. And it's not that big of a deal, but kind of just bothers me that I can't remember who's on top. Um, I should probably check. But I got most of those thigh muscles down really well. Even if most people categorize them by simpler names, still, knowing what a lat is important. If you know latissimus dorsi, then then you're a little bit better off. Or same with the pecs, the pectoralis major, minor, and I think it's medius. Or there's actually 3 of them there, if I recall correctly. At least 2, but I think there's 3. But I definitely think it's a good idea to master the names so that you know what you're looking at and why. And in the age of, at least during the fad of generative AI, I don't know how long this is going to last, what it's going to mean in the long term. But it's partially the reason I wanted to shift to doing more analog media stuff was I'm kind of looking at it like, I don't want to even look at the computer half the time. But I think in that age, in this time period, and probably going forward, I think it's a good idea to develop an attitude of extreme competence. That you're really on top of the game. So even if you're in a situation where you're required to interact with it or use it, that your abilities are really refined, and it's not going to impede your experience as an artist. It's not going to degrade you as much because you've achieved higher levels of competence. And I definitely think that's something to consider for especially young people, but anybody really. It's like, oh, where am I? What could I be better at? What could I be more competent in? And what am I leaving on the table? So that's kind of my rallying cry, I guess, lately has been, you know, I'm deeply concerned. Yeah, I see attitudes among other faculty where they really want to use this stuff. They somehow think it's going to make them more creative, more productive, and simply not the case. It's based on studies I've read, things I've looked at, stories I've checked out, which you see in Instagram stories, the stuff I'm finding. Um, it undermines people's developed skills. It prevents them from developing skills. I'll probably pass on that. That just sounds like spam to me. I'm going to go over there and read it real quick. While I have that up. There we go. Over here and bam. Go through and delete. Oh, start delete. All right, good. Yeah, I would think with the way all these streaming services and text chat things working, like if someone's out there sending out like the same messages over and over again to people, like you'll get ads for get all these fake followers that you don't need for any reason at all, and you would think that would be like a red flag to all of these systems to like get rid of that person like right away. These systems are so smart. 3:30. Oh, I'm going for a couple hours. That's good. Making good progress. It's half an hour. My dog. That's probably half the reason he came over, because he's thinking about his time of day. Which there's a few of those. One of them's at 4. It includes 3 very important activities. One of them is going for a WALK. And then the other one is coming home and getting a TREAT, followed up by a DINNER. And those are all, top priority activities for my dog on a daily basis. And they're not the only ones, but they are on the schedule. So they are important to maintain and follow through on a daily basis, because schedule. It's going to be fun to do like a little slice of the environment. That's what really this picture is about. A little bit nervous about that chomping there, Bosch. Do we need another bath? Never taught him that word, so he doesn't know what that word means. So like a lot of owners I've noticed, well, not, I don't know how many is a lot, but I've noticed people with their dogs, and like they almost kind of torture their dog with the word bath. It's like it's time for a bath. Are you excited? The dog, of course, is not excited for bath. They don't understand why we're throwing them into a tub of water or soaking them with a soaking them down with a hose and then rubbing like a weird smelling fluid all over them while giving them a massage. It's very weird. I think understandably so. Yeah, I'm sure dogs would have a lot to tell us about if they could speak. They understand us. They learn our words, and they manage to deal with us pretty well. But it's like right now he just walked up to me and yawned, which means it's about time you can stop talking to nobody and take me out for my WALK. Even though you're not mentally well, human, because you sit and talk to your desk all day long, he's like, I still appreciate your assistance, and I'm willing to let you get me out for a constitutional. Right? Um, so, in spite of my many offenses and mental issues, he still appreciates me and will let me make the decisions and be helpful, but he will be there to remind me. So, he came over and just yawned at me. He also snorts quite a bit too when we're heading out. It's like, let's go. This is let's go snort. Well, we got 30 minutes, so we're good. Usually around this time, of course, he starts saying, hey, just in case you forgot, I have not, and just want to make sure we get out the door on time. Yeah, they are very tolerant of us, so I do appreciate my dog's willingness to accept and deal with my personal failings in regards to existing as a non-dog person, as a human instead. So yeah, he's now standing below me, not looking at me. So boss, you're gonna have to wait. It's not time. You have to wait. Yeah. So we don't like that word. Oh, look, we got the guy back again. Let's get rid of that bot. Let's see. Bam. I wonder how many people like fall for these kind of scammy chatbot things on these systems. I do wonder about it because most people know what they are. It's like back, I used to get these emails and it'd be like from a good Christian man in Ghana or Nigeria or whatever. Where it'd be like, I'm a priest who's trying to escape, or a Nigerian prince or whatever, and I need help transferring my money and resources out of the country, and I X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. And I always wondered like how many people fell for those. I mean, I guess you just need one, right, to for that to work on. But same thing with the the guy who's just throwing a bunch of stuff in there. You know, at least time it so it feels like a conversation. It's like, oh, hey, how are you? How are you doing? I do X, Y, and Z. What are you doing over here? You know, seems like they could get one of these AI chatbots like ChatGPT to write them up a better script or something, rather than whatever it is that they're delivering. But yeah, and my dog's doing his not looking at me thing, and he always does this like half an hour before we head out. So, but it's on the schedule, Bosch. But it's tough on a dog because he feels like it's about that right time, and the light looks right, and it must be time. Yeah, but mine would definitely have some things to say. He snorts quite a bit, so I imagine those are often kind of swear words. Um, it's like, come on, man. Sometimes the scratching too is like a way of him trying to get my attention in the morning or something if I happen to sleep in. Scratch, 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 scratch. Like what he says. It is time. Oh. So I'm like, I check the clock, and Bosch, when the clock hits the 0 in 20 minutes, then it'll be time. Oh. Yeah, but he would definitely have some suggestions for the main office. for me, mostly, obviously. I'd like to get this done. I think it'd be a good one to kind of finish up. Scan it in and color it. I appreciate that. Very kind. Still won't get you an A in the class. I got an email from a student telling me all about how they were going to miss the first week of class. And I'm like, oh. I appreciate that. Hoping to get out in about 15 minutes. 15 more minutes, and then I'll be putting a pause on this for a bit. Do that. I've been trying to watch movies lately. So I've got a whole bunch of movies I've never watched, and trying to kind of remedy that. Like I watched Apocalypto day before yesterday. I watched yesterday. I watched Tropic Thunder, which I'd never seen. It's kind of got all these great memeable moments in it, and I just never got around to seeing it. So I watched that, and then so I would recommend both of them. I did notice that like Apocalypto seemed to be filmed weird. I think I was asking somebody, and I think it was filmed using early digital, and so it just wasn't as good in terms of like the film quality you can get with digital now. But kind of felt like it was being recorded with a camcorder because the way all the information felt really crunched down, all the visual information. It's a good story. Um, Definitely enjoyed it, but I did notice that a dentist on a Sunday. Huh? I need to find a dentist. Put that on my list for the week. Sit down and get that sorted. I need to figure out remember what my insurance stuff is, just because I just don't remember. I'm really bad at taking advantage of my benefits. They're mine, right? It's part of my compensation, but Besides, I should probably get the office to pay for these paper things like that too. And certain software. As usual, people come in and do let me know if there's any questions. You giving up, Bosch? I guess that bed's not in the best spot, huh? Needs to be scooted forward. My poor suffering dog only has like 5 or 6 beds. So it's got 2 in here, 1 under each desk, and then let's see, where's that? There it goes. He sleeps in the big bed with me, of course. And we got a beanbag downstairs, and then another bed in front of the couch. He likes to sleep under my feet sometimes. And then one in the car for long trips. So, I guess that's, something. Good. or afternoon, I guess. I'm on here for about another 8 minutes, looks like. I gotta take the dog out for his late afternoon slash evening constitutional. She's very excited about it. He has positioned himself so that I will not get lost. And he can easily remind me about the particulars of today's important schedule. Right, Bosch? Plus, he doesn't like to do number 2 in the yard. Pretty extreme degree, so I do have to like get him out so he can take care of that. So, yeah, don't hesitate to ask any questions before we're done in the next few minutes here. Um, so, let's see. 5 minutes. That feels like a good start, I think. I would tell you when the clock is winding down, I think, because it makes me pay attention to it more, I think, than I should. guy's really got a whole bunch of those people working for him over there on Kick, huh? Man. Man. All right, 3 minutes. In there. Almost there. All right, 4 o'clock. So I'm going to finish up this little bit of heat in this nib, and then we're going to get the dog out. All right. That is it for the afternoon. I'm going to be back in the evening once I get dinner and all of that taken care of. My dog heard that word. He's starting to be familiar with that one. All my toys away. It's in its spot. And appreciate everybody that came in, and we'll talk to you all later.